So, with Alabama set to begin spring practice this Friday, there's a lot of excitement for us to get to. What news will be brought about because of spring practice, and how will the development of all the new guys go down? Things that we are going to talk about, but before we can even get into all of that, there's something in regards to spring practice that we've been talking about for so long, and you, as Alabama fans, have told me it's what you're most intrigued about. And of course, we're talking about the offensive line. So today, we're going to take a look at the Crimson Tide's offensive line going into spring practices and what we need to look for. Before we begin, as always, y'all know the drill. I want to hear from you. So hop down to the comments, Y for yes, N for no. Do you believe we will see improvement from the Crimson Tide offensive line this year? One would hope we certainly would, but I'm very interested in hearing from you. If you are new to the channel, be sure to subscribe, hit that bell notification. I'm on my push to 15,000 subscribers, and I'd really love to have you along. And if you enjoyed the video, like and comment down below. Those interactions are massive. But with all that being said, let's hop right into this. And look, this is a topic that you as fans have talked to me a lot about, and it's something we've talked about on live streams that I am incredibly interested to see. There's a lot of different position groups for the Crimson Tide we can point to and talk about with intrigue. Whether we're talking about running backs and the addition of Jahmyr Gibbs, or the wide receiver room, who, though inexperienced, I believe has a lot of talent there. But it's all for naught if we really can't get to the jux to the point, and that is the offensive line for the Crimson Tide. A group that has been synonymous with Alabama's success for as long as many of us can remember. The offensive line for the Crimson Tide is one where they are going to be missing pieces headed to the NFL draft, namely Evan Neal, who may just be the #1 draft pick in the nation. And Alabama is certainly no stranger to replacing individuals that leave to the draft. Nick Saban has made that an absolute pastime for the Crimson Tide, but it still remains that you already had an offensive line that was a little bit shaky last year, and now you're having to replace who may just be the #1 pick in the draft, but looks to be destined for a top 10 pick. That's not going to be easy to do, yet luckily the Crimson Tide have been recruiting very well, which is surprising to nobody. So let's take a look at this offensive line and first understand who's not in the picture anymore. We just talked about Evan Neal, but Chris Owens is also no longer there, and Tommy Brown and Pierce Quick both tested the transfer portal and no longer look to be with the Crimson Tide. But that doesn't mean that there's not depth, and especially in the interior, because when we're talking about Alabama's offensive line, that's where I'd really like to start, because that's where it has the fewest questions in my opinion, and we can start with the center position, because this is where Alabama's in a really unique spot. Two individuals got reps last season in Seth McLaughlin and then Darian Dalcourt, so there will be a competition at that position, but it's the type of competition you love, and it's really the type of competition Nick Saban is always alluding to in his recruiting pitches. You have two capable individuals who displayed they're capable, who now get another full offseason to continue learning, to continue progressing, and they're going to be going up against each other for whoever gets rights to that position. That's a really healthy competition that I think is going to be very positive for this offensive line unit as a whole. But I think the ability to return a center is big when you may have questions elsewhere. But if we look past the center and get to the guard position, this is where things could get interesting. Because Emil Ekiyor returns for another season, and that was a major win for Alabama. I would contend just as big of a win as Henry To'o returning, or the duo of Jordan Battle and DeMarco Hellams returning. Ekiyor gives the Crimson Tide experience and continuity at that guard position and allows for there to be one less question for the new offensive line coach to have to try and figure out. But where it gets really interesting when we're talking about the guard position is, one, what happens with Javion Cohen, an individual who could play exterior or interior. If he's asked to play interior, then you're looking at a situation where the presumptive starters are whoever wins the battle out of McLaughlin and Darian Dalcourt, Emil Ekiyor, and then Javion Cohen. And if you're looking at that as the interior of your offensive line, you can start to feel good about that interior unit. You have experience, you have continuity, and you've got some very talented players, and that would really shore up the inside presence of the Crimson Tide's offensive line. However, in the event that Cohen does slide out and play tackle, tackle, you still have some options at that guard position. One of the things I'm most interested in terms of guard is how does the depth develop behind the two guys that we think are presumptive starters in Cohen and Ekiyor, assuming Cohen is to play guard. That right there will answer a lot, and it will shore up a lot if guys can continue to develop on the back end behind those guys. Because in the event that Cohen slides to the outside, if you're able to develop guys in the spring and they're able to impress, you're then feeling easy about having someone new slide into that guard position when at least you're able to return continuity and experience at center and the opposite guard, and then sliding a tackle out that has some experience as well. But for simplicity's sake, now that we're moving to the tackle position, let's assume for this conversation that Javion Cohen will be playing guard. And in the event that Cohen is playing guard and that interior is as strong as I think it could be, if our combination is whoever wins the center battle, Cohen and Ekiyor, well, now the offensive tackle position is squarely where the questions lie for the Crimson Tide offensive line unit. And though the Crimson Tide have talent that they can use on the exterior, what they don't have is the experience that you would probably like, and especially on a year where you already had shaky offensive line play last year, now you're fast forwarding into a situation where, yeah, your interior could be really solid, but your exterior isn't going to be able to be replaced with guys that have a whole lot of experience. However, that's why this spring is so important. And when we look at the names we could be looking at for these tackle positions, there's a lot of different angles. You have Amari Kite, you have J.C. Latham, you have Tommy Brockermeyer, you have Damian George, and you have Tyler Booker, all individuals who are going to be fighting for those reps for first-team tackles. I think J.C. Latham is a name we need to watch coming from IMG, a former 5-star, someone who the expectations for are very high. But one of the things I always talk about in terms of offensive linemen is how difficult it is to develop into the position coming from high school to the collegiate game because of the massive difference in things necessary to win. We're talking a difference in speed, strength, and technique, all things that are going to be vastly different than you need at the high school level. So J.C. Latham is a name we need to watch, but Tommy Brockermeyer is also another individual who came to the Crimson Tide as a 5-star in an offensive line haul that was phenomenal for Alabama, in which case they got the number 1 tackle, the number 2 tackle, the number 2 guard, and the number 1 center in the nation. So they do have the talent there, but are one of those 5-stars going to step up, or could we see both of those 5-stars step up and satisfy the 2 missing tackle positions? That's going to be ultimately what a lot of Alabama fans are looking at, but don't put it all on those 2 names, because Amari Kite was someone who was listed as Evan Neal's backup last season, so he's someone who's had a bit of time in the system. He knows what's expected, and he's a name we need to keep up with. But also, Damian George is another person we need to watch. Very talented offensive lineman, got some reps this past season, so he does have some understanding, and he has a bit more time in the system than does Brockermeyer and Latham. And finally, you get to Tyler Booker, the true freshman, who's very talented and was making waves on the All-American scene. But like I just said, it's very difficult for a true freshman to contribute in that regards. However, that does not mean it's impossible. And if someone was able to do it, Tyler Booker has the ability to do it. It's all about the development that can take place between now and Game 1. But that is why this spring is going to be so important, because we can talk about how many intriguing position battles we will have. But if the offensive line doesn't get it fixed, those positional battles are going to become less important than they ultimately should be. And there is talent at the offensive line room. Look, we're talking about the University of Alabama, who historically has fielded really great offensive lines. So it's embedded into the DNA of not only the program, but of Tide fans, which is why so many of you were so discontent with the inconsistencies the offensive line had last year, because that's an area that's been embedded into the Crimson Tide DNA, and one that the talent is there to continue that tradition. It's just about how they're able to develop during the spring. But I am very interested in hearing from you. Hop down to the comments, let me know what you're looking for. That's it. See ya.